I always like the first 15 minutes when I walk through the door and I'm having these casual conversations and I'm laughing with guys and talking about life. And then Scott gets up here and reminds me that I have to speak tonight. And my heart starts going. And then he talks about how difficult it's going to be. And I'm like, this is a weighty thing that I never ever want to take for granted. I know what I'm doing up here. I'm speaking forth for God, praying through what He wants me to say, and I know that He's using a broken and flawed vessel to do so. So I pray that if I ever say anything in any way that is not of Him, He would cause you to forget it, and He would forgive me for doing so. But I also pray every day that He would give me the words to speak to you. And you can decipher in your heart if that's the case or not. I wanted to show you this last week, but I kind of skipped over it. We'll get to that. If you want to watch the previous Mighty Men videos, you can go to this website. Now, I will confess that I have not put up more than 2 videos. There should be 4 videos up at this point, but it takes so darn long. Anybody try to upload a video to YouTube? I was sitting for hours today waiting for this to go through, and finally I had to leave. And this happened about 3 or 4 times so far. So I will try. I'll do it overnight. I'll just let it upload, but I'll have all 4 videos up by the end of this week. So be prepared for that. But let's begin by reviewing where we have been thus far, and then we'll begin to transition into tonight's discussion. Can somebody turn this down just a little bit, please? I'm getting that feedback. Thank you. I began this series by sharing my own story. If you remember, I focused on 3 facets of separation as I experienced them throughout my life. Those 3 were the following. When I was young, I felt separated from God. I wasn't raised in a Christian home. And given the context in which I was being brought up and all the pain and suffering that I was seeing, it was hard for me to believe that there was a God who loved me and had a plan for my life. So I was distant and disconnected from God. And I believe that as a result of this, I was also separated from myself. Because I didn't know who I was as a creature created in the image and likeness of God. I grew up very insecure. I didn't like myself. I felt disconnected from myself psychologically. And I believe that as a result of this, I had a very difficult time connecting with other human beings. So I experienced a separation from God, a separation from myself, and a separation from others. Now, after sharing my own story, we examined the links between my story, and I would add all of our stories, and the story of Adam and Eve. If you remember, as a result of their sin and distrust in God, they experienced the same 3 facets of separation in that story recorded in Genesis 3. Now, from our survey of what theologians call the fall, I argue that at bottom, all sin stems from a distrust in God and a lack of faith in God. I mean, if you just take a couple of minutes to think about this, every time we pick up and use or mistreat others or act selfishly or pridefully, we are right back at the garden once again. Because somewhere at the heart of all sin, which separates us from God, we believe, even if it's just for that moment in our lives, we believe that we need to take matters into our own hands. That we need to fend for ourselves. That we need to take what we want. We need to save ourselves from our sadness, because deep down inside, even if it is just for that very moment in our lives, we fear that God's way or word or promises somehow don't reach us. This is the very definition of distrust, man. It's the very thing that pulls us away from God. So this led us into last week's discussion, in which I tried to show that because of our unbelief, we have this tendency inside of us to try to save save ourselves. Just as Adam and Eve attempted to secure their own salvation of happiness apart from God by eating the forbidden fruit, we too play the role of self-saviors. For the addict, one feels the need to save themselves from the negative feelings that they're feeling in the moment, so we get high. For the religious person, they lack faith that God will save them apart from their own good deeds. So they anxiously try to ensure that their good deeds somehow outweigh their bad deeds in hopes of earning their way into heaven someday. The man who lusts in his heart after women, he lacks a belief that God's plan for marriage is sufficient for him. So he seeks his own gratification apart from God. For the selfish rich man, he just trusts that God's provision is enough for him. So he seeks tirelessly to secure his own provisions apart from God. For the person who tells lies, he lacks the belief that God's way of telling the truth is the best course for his life. For all of us, every time we lash out at our wives, or become fearful or anxious about our circumstances, or lift ourselves up in pride, we do so because somewhere deep down inside of us, we don't trust what God says is good for us, or what he says is bad for us. We don't believe that he is looking out for us, and we lack the faith to fully surrender to his will and ways. And as a result of this distrust, we take matters into our own hands, create the deeper wedges between us and God. Now, last week I explained how at bottom many addicts and religious folks are really the same. And I use these two as an illustration because these are the two that I work with the most. And the reason why they're the same, even though it looks very different on the surface, is because both the addict and the religious person are really doing the same things. The addict is trying to save themselves from a state of unhappiness, so they set out in destructive ways to secure this happiness through the use of mind-altering substances. The religious person, on the other hand, is also trying to save themselves from a state of unhappiness, albeit from hell. So they set out to secure their own seat in heaven through their own good deeds. Both stem from a lack of trusting in God, and both are selfish and prideful, and both will ultimately never achieve what the person seeks. It's not just the religious person and the addict that is seeking to save themselves. In some ways, it's all of us. I know this because all of us sin. And all sin is a pulling away and a separation from God by placing our wills at the center, even if it's just for that moment in our lives. I can imagine that some of you may wrestle with this concept. You might even be thinking to yourself, well, I know that I can't save myself. That's ridiculous. So this doesn't really apply to me. If this is you, I think, may reveal that you have not considered your sin deeply enough. It may reveal that you have only considered the surface effects of sin and not the root causes. When you and I sin, every time you and I sin, we in some way sin because even if it's only for that moment in our lives, we think that we must take matters into our own hands. Every time we sin, there is something that we desire, that we feel that we need to secure for ourselves, whether it's God's approval, sexual gratification, happiness, security, or retribution. Every sin, then, is like the first sin. We, like Adam, feel at that moment that we must lay hold of the fruit for ourselves because God is withholding it from us. So we reach out. We take it for ourselves. And then we feel more distant from God and hate ourselves. And usually end up taking it out on those who are closest to us. So I wonder, has anything really changed? Last week was all about exposing this distrust in God in hopes of preparing our hearts to surrender more deeply to Him. The reason why I'm laboring at this point is because the pathway to a deeper and more intimate walk with God begins by renouncing ourselves. So by becoming aware of this, we are positioned to confess our lack of faith in God in hopes that He will build our faith. We can acknowledge our utter weakness to save ourselves so that He can save. So everything I have said and done thus far was to point out the futility and feebleness of our attempts to make it to heaven or to create a heaven here on earth for ourselves apart from Him. It's a worthless endeavor. And those who have tried the hardest know the best. Now, if we don't get this, we will never get the heaven that we all so desperately desire. In short, we must give up our attempts to make it. Whatever making it looks like for us, we have to surrender that. We must lift up our arms to God like a little child and beg of Him to carry us where we can't go. This week I want to take all of this to a climactic point in this series. Everything we have done has been building up to this point, in which we're going to talk about what it means to surrender our wills over to God. And to help me do that, I asked my best friend, my good friend, Jeremy Grant, to come up here and just share a little bit about what surrender means to him.
My name's Jeremy. I started here last year. It was my first year here. I came 3 weeks in. My story starts when I was 13. I started smoking weed and drinking alcohol. I wasn't in a real religious household. I knew of God. My parents didn't tell us to go to church or anything like that. Matter of fact, when I was 16, my dad handed me my first painkiller to give me energy to work. From that point on, I was asking him for one every day. 1 went to 2, 2 went to 3, 3 went to 4, to 5, to my mom's first stealing her morphine. When I was 18, my dad started shooting morphine. He was my best friend. I was with him all the time. I got up Saturday morning to walk through to get a shower, and I saw him laying on his bed. And he was dead. He had a heart attack in his sleep. He overdosed on morphine. From that point, I went into harder drugs. I started really abusing pain medication. I started doing any kind of drug I could get my hands on. I was smoking embalming fluid, tripping on acid, mushrooms, any drug you can think of, I was doing it. 2 years after that, my mother passed away. She was addicted to painkillers, and she was also bulimic. She caught walking pneumonia, and she passed away. Her organs shut down. That took me deeper. After that, I went homeless for 2.5 years. I was on the street. I got into a government-funded housing program after the 2.5 years, and I was off the street, but I was still living hardly. I was selling dope. I was using dope. I was housing homeless people in my apartment. No electric. The water was shut off, so I was basically still homeless. I just had a shelter. Couple years or 2 years after that, my sister, she died. She died in California. She was shooting dope in the back of the car with her friends. She overdosed. They got scared and they threw her along the highway. That right there sent me into a really deep, dark place. I hated everybody. I didn't like anybody. I was, really abusing drugs. I actually went as far as to get 4 carpal tunnel surgeries. I got one on each hand, and I don't have carpal tunnel. I never did. I had maybe some kind of pain in there, but it wasn't worth getting surgery. I did it to get pain pills. razors out of the shaving razors. I took the razors out of them. I cut my legs open to the point where there was meat hanging out of my leg. 4 pain killers. I've had people run over my legs for them. I've had a friend beat me up with a baseball bat for them. I started doctor hopping. I got blacklisted at a couple pharmacies. I got blacklisted at Smile Builders. All of this stemming from my dad's death, which I wanted to cover up that hole that was built in my heart after losing him. I had nobody to turn to anymore. I had nobody, no family members, nothing. I met my now wife, Tiffany, and she stuck with me through it all. She stuck with all the pain pills and, taking 90 Percocet in one day, and still standing there. Sometimes taking 100 pills in one day. She stuck with me the whole time. I come to find out that every night when I would pass out in bed, she would put her hand on me, and she was praying for God to take the darkness out of me and fill me with His light. After doing that for, I guess, a month, He answered her. It worked. He answered. I had gone out, wind a little bit there. I had gone out one night drinking. We got in a fight over pain pills. She was concerned about me. She was on my back about it. I did not like being told what to do. I went out drinking and actually got in a fight with 2 bouncers. Got my butt kicked. I woke up the next day on a buddy's couch, and for some odd reason, man, I felt the need to go to church. So I went to Victory Church in